think there's a lot of emphasis on psychedelics, but there's many other ways to have expanded states.
In your opinion, what sort of wisdom are we missing out as a human collective by getting rid of such previously sacred psychedelic rituals?
So when you take these substances, what it does by decreasing the metabolism in the brain, or you're actually decreasing that sense of separation, so you're actually seeing more of what's really out there. So you get all this additional information, maybe from the collective unconsciousness, like Jung would say. There's no time, there's no space, there's no feeling, there's no anything. The only thing that's left is awareness.
Trying to find yourself, you will never be able to do that, because the same way that the fire cannot burn itself, the knife cannot cut itself, you cannot know yourself as consciousness.
And what they found is at 6 months, the psilocybin condition was experiencing much greater benefit in terms of decreasing their depressive symptoms compared to the people who were on the SSRIs. The more you love them, the deeper that loss, that grief will be. And the grief is an expression of love that was never able to be expressed. That's a great question. No one's asked me that, but I've thought about it a lot. I've read about this quite a bit. So I've done a lot of these interviews, and the first person to ask that, I think, is actually both. So I think that there are
Michael Tiero, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Michael, so there are 9,000-year-old paintings of psilocybin mushrooms in Algeria. There is the Egyptian arts that they used to use, blue lotus everywhere depicted in their rituals. Then the Greeks in the Eleusinian mysteries, they used to consume ergot. And then the Aztecs mushrooms, you have Latin, like Native Americans doing peyote, African tribes using iboga. Human civilization all across the globe has used psychedelics in some sort of healing practices or spiritual experiences, as far back as we can see. Why is it that in modern society we label them as dangerous drugs instead of the sacred medicines our ancestors believed them to be?
Well, I think that narrative has been pretty well articulated. I mean, we lost connection with those ways since the Middle Ages into the scientific revolution and coming into our kind of Western world, what we think of as Western world, United States and Europe and Western culture. This information was lost, and then it came back in the 50s as a therapeutic modality. MDMA was rediscovered, I think, in the 30s, and then psilocybin was sort of shouldn't be rediscovered, was discovered by the West, that it existed and had been existed with the Mazatec Indians for, continuously. And there was a lot of promise and hope, in addition to LSD. Well, what happened is a very perfectly understandable story is people started using these things, and we were in a wartime scenario in the late 60s with Vietnam, and people were refusing to fight because they were kind of recognizing getting some sovereignty of themselves and realizing that the paradigm that we were sort of fed in the 50s in the United States was maybe not something that we as beings were aligned with, going out to another country to like put our will on this other country for reasons that weren't clear to the population. And
Right.
Nixon made it illegal and shut down, basically 50 years of potential progress in terms of spiritual development, in terms of healing modalities that are only coming back to surface now. But it's basically because these, I think, so this is my perspective, because many of these entheogenic substances allow us to see things from a perspective other than the narrative that we're given by society, connecting us closer to, who we are, our purpose, our fulfillment, our satisfaction with life, take us outside of a consumer modality and into a sort of being and satisfaction modality. That doesn't align with the goals of power. And therefore, it took a long time, not a long time in terms of like the human scale or evolutionary scale, but it took, 50 years where we're missing this thing. And now it's coming back because there is so much progress and there's so much now vetted scientific research done in the most rigorous standard showing that these entheogenic substances can be super powerful for you know it almost sounds too good to be true what it's good for.
True, and especially in a society where it's based on on growth and consumerism. If you feel content, if you have a complete paradigm shift where you realize the car doesn't mean anything, the money doesn't mean anything, all these status games we made up as we went along, I can absolutely see how all of the hippies would no one would give the tax money to any war anymore. If you give LSD to almost every single person, they will stop funding all of the shitty projects that the governments have. On you on that.
That's been a thought experiment that's been discussed since the 60s.
Are you positive with all this new research on clinical trials, or you think they're going to remain in that stage for a very long time?
Well, I mean, so this is a hypothesis I have, my understanding. So MDMA seemed to be cleared for FDA approval, had very positive outcomes, and compared to other medicines that have been approved, it seemed like a no-brainer. I don't know if you know about this, the MDMA story in the United States. So we had all this research on MDMA for PTSD, and then suddenly it looked like it was going to be approved, I think, in 2024 for use. You could buy it through a pharmacy, through with a therapist or a doctor that was vetted with, you know, that had the approvals for doing this. And then all of a sudden they said no. And what I think my conspiracy, put on my tinfoil hat, my conspiracy theorist is because, I used to work in pharmaceuticals in a pharmaceutical company, and the pharmaceutical company moved from acute healing, like for example antibiotics and stuff like that. We do very little research on antibiotics anymore because you give it to the patient once, even if it's a really expensive antibiotic for, let's say, $10,000 for a treatment, you heal the patient, take care of their issue, and that revenue stream is gone. But these other medicines, metabolic medicines, you have the Ozempics, as well as all the psych meds that are not, they're effective for some people, but they're not effective for as many people as we've been told that they are used for. But these are like lifetime drugs. So they get in a revenue stream that's coming in for good for a patient's life. And so the revenue is more consistent. It is more, it is much longer. And so when you get these new generation of drugs that don't have necessarily, even sometimes are not even patentable, but so they're going to be cheap, they're going to be off patent, and they have the potential to take care of or support or lessen the symptoms that the alternative is, a lifetime management sort of product. That's a threat to one of the biggest industries we have. And my tinfoil hat idea is that there was probably lobbying going on, questioning safety and things that seem to already have been put to rest, but calling into question the safety of some of these things, even though I mean, there are safety concerns, especially with MDMA, but I mean, they can be easily mitigated by screening people out for contraindications that they have. So I think because of the potential for, ironically, because of the potential for the healing of some of the symptoms that people are going to some of these long-term medications, that there's, the powers to be again don't want this to go out into the mainstream, don't want this to be readily available because it will cut into the bottom line for some of these companies that do these long-standing, lifetime medications. That's my thought, and you can quote me on it, but it just seems very fishy.
No, makes sense.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah. Makes absolute sense, man. And the most disgusting part in this is that people are willing to keep others sick and bedridden to make money, like just
With
so they
crazy
can
side
go.
effects.
It's just ridiculous. It's just they need a fifth yacht apparently, or a seventh house somewhere by Spain, and okay, let's keep some poor person in SSRIs their whole lives and convince them they have depression. The thing with again, this is very anecdotal from my circle and people that I know that have done or do drugs. even recreational at least, you can tell how the massive difference of that the pharmaceuticals from big pharma and these natural psychedelics. So even if you're a healthy adult with no mental disorders, and you have a relatively good physique and you're healthy and young, if you do psychedelics, you might just benefit from them. And I know people who are perfectly healthy, and this person that I mentioned, who trying antidepressants out of curiosity due to recreational drug use and getting hooked on the second dose, getting addicted to it immediately, subjective experience of life, suddenly feeling worse. However, immediately you cannot do without it. So in a way, when you're healthy, I believe you can understand how much more this addictive are these SSRIs than the people who, maybe benefit from them.
Yeah. And I'm working on a review. I'm making a video review of kind of like where we are right now in the research with regards to psilocybin. And it's interesting. They did a study at John Hopkins that compared psilocybin to an SSRI. I can't remember I can't remember the name of the SSRI because they used a generic name, so it doesn't come up. But immediately in that one study, so this is, hear me out here. Immediately in that one study, there was not a huge difference at the measure, which was about a couple weeks out in terms of the effectiveness. So they were both effective. However, they relooked at the data and went back to, in a second study, they went back to those same subjects that were participants in there 6 months later. And what they found is at 6 months, the psilocybin condition was experiencing much greater benefit in terms of decreasing their depressive symptoms compared to the people who were on the SSRIs. So in the short-term window that they looked at in the first part of the study, they didn't show a difference, a big difference. There was a little difference, but it wasn't statistically significant. It was a small sample size. But at 6 months, that difference was really highlighted, meaning that, integration. For me, it means that integration and working on what you learn from the experience itself is so important, and integrating that into your life rather than masking the symptoms with a pill.
That's so true. Integration is so important. It has to be intentional. If it's not intentional, you don't know what you're doing. And psychedelics are so cheap too. Like they're so goddamn cheap. Big pharma will go bankrupt within a day. People being able to raise mushrooms in the although that wouldn't be advised, or is not like I don't know, you don't have maybe the right product, but anyways, it is and can be so cheap, it will just bankrupt them, and you see why they would lobby against it for sure.
Yeah.
In your opinion, yeah, sorry, go on,
Sure.
go on.
I was going to say, just to be very careful, I do believe that there is a significant amount of, I wouldn't say danger, but risk to doing these things on your own, because
Certainly.
it can be quite an intense experience. And if, for example, someone is contraindicated because they do have a condition, like let's say family member with schizophrenia in close generation, we don't know if there's a relation there, but it could potentiate those symptoms happening in a young person, right? So I want to be very cautious about saying like this isn't something that people should rush out and do on their own, but they should be supervised either medically with a therapist or with a guide.
Is there a test? Can someone test themselves if they have schizophrenia in the bloodline? Is that somehow possible in modern medicine? Do you know?
I believe there's a genetic test, but I don't know how would we don't know that much about how schizophrenia actually like manifests. But I know that the clearance, the clearance sort of protocol that most guides use is if you have somebody in your family who has schizophrenia and you're under the age of 24, then you have to wait till you're after 24, because schizophrenia usually presents before the age of 24, 25. So if you're outside of that window, people aren't presenting with schizophrenia all of a sudden out of the blue when they're 35, right? So that is one issue. There's also bipolar. This one is actually a risk. If someone has bipolar, they can drop into a manic episode. And sometimes those manic episodes actually look very positive. But those are pretty much the main two psychiatric conditions that people screen out for, and that are something to be very cautious of. And then you don't know if you don't know your dose or the strain of mushroom that you're getting. Some mushrooms, like something called, it's a funny name, albino penis envy, they're very powerful. You take 2 grams of those, it's like taking a heroic dose of a more normal mushroom. So, or somebody doesn't know how much they're taking. I've interviewed a lot of people, clients who've done stuff. No one knows how much they took. I don't know how much I took. They give it to me at a party, right? I went to
Wow.
a show or whatnot. They have no clue. Did you take 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, 5 grams? I have no idea. And so that's another set of risks, like stepping into and getting into a situation, maybe in public or in the wrong setting, where you are unsafe physically because of the environment, or you can have a very uncomfortable experience and not have the tools and the support around you, so somebody can kind of bring you out of a very challenging situation and bring it into something that can be more easily digested and taken care of. So that those are all very important things to know, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't come without a risk. That being said, and the odd case out excluded, in your opinion, what sort of wisdom are we missing out as a human collective by getting rid of such previously sacred psychedelic rituals?
I mean, that's a huge question. We are what we talked about in the beginning. We're such a kind of materialistic, consumeristic society, and that's antithetical to you know the view of most of our ancestors, especially like go back like 1,000 years or something like that. And it is only a very recent phenomenon that we have, social media and this consumerism coming out from a few couple 100 years at least, right? Not social media, but consumerism and in our modern sort of understanding, especially in the West, of what it means to live a good life, which it's tied into like how much you have, much less so with what your purpose is, what your satisfaction is, how fulfilled you feel in terms of living a meaningful life. And people are longing for and looking for these quick dopaminergic hits through partying, through social media, video games, porn, even cannabis, alcohol, gambling, watching too many sports, anything that you do kind of unintentionally. Our relationships are broken. People are feeling isolated. These are results of not being able to connect with ourselves and community in a manner more closely aligned with how we evolve. And part of that is connecting with, something greater than ourselves.
Hmm.
There's an artist an author that I really has had a big impact on me. His name is Bernardo Castro, and he was explaining that, or one of his ideas was that these expanded states, these kind of feelings of connection, actually happened even without the you know even without the use of entheogenic substances, because before we had the one of the ways, and I think this is really interesting, that people would have these expanded states unintentionally was through fever. So you
Wow.
know that when you have a high fever, people tend to have these experiences that are expanded, where the mind sort of shuts down because it's too hot and whatever happened in fever, and they have fever dreams, right? And they come back with maybe having these feelings of connection with something more divine, something connected. And so this was more of a process. And so not only did we disconnect ourselves from the medicines like mushrooms and like you said, ergot and all these things that people used to use in the past, but we also limited people's connection with having a fever. And I think that that's a good thing, but it is, that we can, because fevers are dangerous. But on the other hand, you can imagine having these fever dreams and having these expanded states in the state of a fever, or near-death experiences that were probably much more common than they are now, where people have these expanded states experiences just out of the blue because they're sick. And then they come back and they're like, oh my goodness, there's something more to this life than me, and bringing back some wisdom from that. But I think it's
Crazy.
it's part of the problem that many of the problems that we have today come from living with a certain um, set of goals and a certain set of beliefs, that can no longer be accommodated if you believe that everything, as long as you have your house and your car and your picket fence and your what they call the American dream in the 50s, but now it's not available to you. And now, because of the economic conditions that we've had over the last 50 years, now you're kind of left with like, poor me. And I don't have anything else anything else deeper, that's more grounded, that's more connected to our purpose. Then we're kind of lost as a society.
Yeah. Yeah, and in modern society also, all these deep, meaningful things are not really promoted. They're rather ridiculed or discouraged. So what matters now is superficiality. What matters now is whenever you dare, unless you're very lucky and you live somewhere where you have an intellectual community or any community that is very deeply um, that has deeply come together, you're lucky. But in most places, people live just very superficial, materialistic lives, and they lack that substance, as you just said. And I personally work in hospitality, and I've had it very difficult even trying to display such interest in such topics or such depth, in life. Everyone thinks like, "Well, what are you? Are you weird? Like, what sort of conversations are these? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't belong here." But unfortunately, this is the reality. This is the reality in everyday life. It's not even encouraged, but even like discouraged to seek such meaning and purpose, as you were saying.
Yeah, and I think that there's also an age thing that comes. People around the age of 42 is the age where I kind of switched from where I went to Peru the first time. But it seems 42 seems to be the plus or minus 3 years seems to be the real tipping point where
Hmm.
people have sense that, okay, I've been scrambling on this hamster wheel for all these years, expecting to get somewhere, and and maybe I've gotten there, right? Maybe I have enough money that I'm comfortable. I might have a house, a car, and kind of sort of set up, and then it sets in, uh, still dissatisfied. And the quest for meaning, oftentimes for a lot of people, starts around the age of 42. I think plus or minus 3 years, and where people realize that they're on the backside of life, going downhill in terms of, they might have 40, 50 years left if they're lucky of a healthy life. And they're like, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to leave this world behind? What's my legacy? Not in an egoic sense, but have I contributed something to it? Has my life been of any real value? Um, and I think that actually comes with age, and that's part of wisdom that I didn't understand when I was younger. I said, well, these people like, and then they get past to a certain age, and they're like, oh, now I kind of more understand,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to the additional wisdoms that come as I continue to age in this body and learn more. So I think that that's part of it too. You seem a lot younger than me, so I'm imagining the people that you're surrounding with in the restaurant industry are still in that pre-42-year-old age where it's about hustling and money and having fun, and you know
Perhaps
it's
I'm
all
a I'm
about.
a rare case in that environment. Yeah, for sure, for
I
sure,
think so. I think
for
so. I can
sure.
feel that.
All right. So you think that psychedelics then can help us live more meaningful lives, that they can add to the way we relate to ourselves and to others around us more meaningfully? You think they
Absolutely. I
can?
think that.
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
mean, absolutely, and I think that's the power of them, is because they kind of show you your life in a different from a different kind of perspective and deeper realizations. And once you open that door, you realize, oops, not oops, like I made a mistake, but there's an alternative way to live this life.
Hmm.
Connection is something that I'm missing, for example, um, purpose and contributing to the world and just, helping others and, being a person of integrity, and um, when that can definitely be achieved through the use of these substances. But again, I like to say, with care, with intention, with proper
Hmm.
support, with the set and setting, very, very, very important.
You mentioned before about expanded states. What do you mean by that? What is exact to someone who is listening to this term for the first time? What does it mean?
Well, because I don't think that I think there's a lot of emphasis on psychedelics, but there's many other ways to have expanded states. You can do, you can have a very powerful, very emotionally releasing, very, psychedelic, to use that word, so you know what I mean, expanded states just by breathing. By You can hyperventilate. There's something called holotropic breath work, and it's also there's all kinds of modalities that are just variants on the same thing. But it was a yogic practice where the best way to do it is to do it with a breathwork facilitator that kind of guides you and keeps you going. So you're hyperventilating. It changes how much, it changes your brain chemistry in a way, and you can have a full blown expanded state experience. People who've meditated for a long time can get into these expanded states that are very similar to the experiences that we get with entheogens. Again, fevers. If you have an uncontrolled fever, you can get into this thing. Near-death experiences. All these have some similar things, and that's why I call them expanded states. They're states that are beyond the normal consensual reality that you and I are experiencing in this moment, because we're having our normal, regular, consensual state that we both agree that I'm seeing you and you're seeing me. We're in front of the computer, all this kind of stuff, and we're seeing the world as we're used to seeing it. But when you have these expanded states, you kind of see more and from different perspectives. And so I use the word expanded states or as a more catch-all for any of these experiences beyond those that are mediated by psychedelics, just to say that there's a lot of ways to do these, and you may have had these experiences. Some of them happen, actually. I have an employee who I got to watch one of his videos. He's an amazing musician. He works with me at one of my businesses, and he was explaining he had a struggle with addiction and all this kind of thing, and he was really depressed, and he was sitting in his room, kind of in a not feeling well and feeling depressed, and this bright light came to him out of the blue, out of the corner, and it told him that everything was going to be okay, that he was safe, and that he was taken care of if he just, cleaned himself up. And he's been crushing it, 8 years sober, and he's an amazing, amazing guy who's really turned his life around. He had an expanded
Wow.
states, but he wasn't taking anything. So I like to use this as a catch-all, because I think it's important to recognize that there's other ways to get to these states. Some of them you don't have a choice in. You didn't intend it, and it can happen, and it's
That
much
sounds
more
like
rare.
some sort of divine intervention or something, no?
Yeah, yeah. He wrote a song about it called "The Day I Found God" or something like that, and it changed his life. And these expanded states, wherever they come from. And so one of the ways to guarantee you have an expanded state is to use psychedelics, right? But there's other ways to have them. That's why I like to include them all in a catch-all, because I don't want to diminish other modalities or other people's experiences, and I don't want to necessarily say that some things are better. The one thing we can say about psychedelics is that it will, close to guarantee that you'll have it. You can control when you're going to have it. You can control the environment that you're in while you're having it. You can control the support structure in terms of having a friend or a trip sitter or a guide or a therapist be with you during the experience. That is under control. And some of the other ways can happen organically or outside of your control. That's why I use the word expanded states.
Right. Okay, so then this begs the question. So, do you think psychedelics are simply messing up with our perception, giving us hallucinations of things that do not exist? Or are they, in a way, unlocking dormant faculties of our processing power of our brains, allowing us to see things that, in a way, are always there, but perceiving them would play no role in our survival? Thus,
Okay.
the brain evolved to ignore information because of how massively calorie dense and demanding it would be for if we experience everything at the same time. So, do you think is it unlocking faculties or is it just pure hallucination?
Well, that's a great question. No one's asked me that, but I've thought about it a lot. I've read about this quite a bit. So I've done a lot of these interviews and be the first person to ask that. I think it's actually both.
Nice.
So I think that there are, um, so what happens with psychedelics in particular, the tryptamines, so like LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and NDMT, is it actually decreases the default mode network in your brain. And we don't totally know exactly how it happens, but 15, 20 years ago, if you were to ask somebody, so this is going to be a long answer. 15, 20 years ago, if you ask somebody, why do you see these things, right? They would say, because these entheogens are stimulating the brain, it's increasing the activation of the brain. So you have more experience, right? You're having a bigger experience, a more intense experience. And that's because your brain is just like lighting up like a Christmas tree. That was the expectation. Then with the advent of functional MRIs, you put people on psychedelics in the functional MRIs and they see that, in all cases, psychedelics actually decrease brain metabolism in certain areas of the brain. So you have this real puzzle of decreased brain experience, particularly in the default mode network, right? But increased conscious experience. You're seeing more things. How do you explain that? So the I'm just going to talk about it very briefly, but there's alternative metaphysics beyond materialism, right? So metaphysics is kind of like the understanding of the base level of reality, and how that works. So one of those is materialism, and that's the one that we've been fed, that everything's just atoms. There's nothing, um, the real hardcore people will say consciousness is just an illusion that's emergent from complexity, or however, there's many ways to describe it, strong emergence, weak emergence, all these kinds of things. But there's an additional metaphysics that's actually more ancient and coming back into vogue now, called idealism. And that says that everything is consciousness, and that we are separate from everything that is consciousness. So everything is consciousness, everything starts as consciousness
Mm-hmm.
through our sense of separation that we maintain through our biological processes, right? Because it's expensive to keep this sense of separation. If I don't eat for 30 days, I'm going to be done. The separation is going to lack being there. So when you take these substances, what it does by decreasing the metabolism in the brain, or you're actually decreasing that sense of separation. So you're actually seeing more of what's really out there. So you get all this additional information, maybe from the collective unconsciousness, like Jung would say, or from really everything that's out there. Things filter in, you get this additional sensation. But we know that we don't see everything that's out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even like the visible
Yeah.
light spectrum, we see very little of that. So that being said, there might be some of those quote unquote hallucinations that are, purely of mind. Maybe they're, activations or something that's happening in your visual processing system that's being distorted or whatnot. But I believe that a lot of what we see is actually more of what is. That being said, it's hard to, when you see more of what is, you can't, it's not in language generally. The
Mm-hmm.
universe or
Yeah.
creation doesn't speak in language. So you often see these things in terms of symbolic messaging, symbolic messages. And then it's our task to really take some real care to put together what we're learning through this symbolic, symbolic sort of understanding and visions that we might have, and turn that into actual meaning for our lives. And that's a tricky endeavor in and of itself. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so that is partly psychological societal conditioning, which is whatever culture myths do you have in your head, which you can hallucinate because you think in language or in stories. And the majority of it is your brain is an antenna, and suddenly it picks up more things that are there that you couldn't do before in a very simplified sort
Yeah.
of way.
I like to think, rather than the brain as an antenna, I like to think that the brain is a filter, right?
Filter, right.
The filter.
The
So when
filter to
you,
your mind, so to say. So
yeah, to your sense of separation
to
from
your
the
sense of
rest of
separation.
reality. So when you think of like, if you remove a filter from, a pool, everything is getting through, right?
All goes in.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
more stuff is getting through. So rather than a tuning in, which I think was the doors of perception Aldous Huxley's sort of idea was that it was like an antenna tuning in. It's
Mm.
actually currently, like in consensual reality, it's a filter. It's filtering out what we don't need, what doesn't serve us. And there's a psychologist named Donald Hoffman, University of California, Irvine, who's done all the circuits, and he's demonstrated that the brain is a filter, because if we saw everything that was uh, that was available, it would be not useful. Most of the information that is external to us, most of the light rays, the light waves and stuff like that, is of no use for us. So we'd be spending calories paying attention to these things that are of no utility to us. So the brain is actually there to filter out that which is not useful for continuing ourselves on the planet. So it's more of a filter. And then with the psychedelics, you remove the filter and then you see more of what is actually there.
And it would be a state of madness as well, being in that constant state, as we
Yeah.
call, you couldn't function in society or survive even as schizophrenics. If you've done a very intense, uncontrollable bad trip with LSD, and you quite often those you convince yourself this is gonna be from now on, that's just insanity. That yeah. So yeah. Okay, so the most out of all people who really go into this either therapeutically or very professionally in quotes, um, they do this because they're after ego death. Can you describe to those that are not familiar with the term what is ego death and why would someone be interested in the death of their identity as they know it?
Wonderful question. So I like to think of the ego death as the ultimate lack of separation. So continuing on with the separate is a great question after the previous one. So
Mm-hmm.
continuing this filter analogy. So you have this ego disillusion, and then you have ego death, right? In how I think of things. So ego disillusion is a huge sort of swath of experience that includes, if you think of the separation or the functioning of that filter, that filter that filters out the rest of the reality, as you start to filter out as you start to remove that filter, right? And you start to, that decreases your sense of separation, your sense of self from the idea of me being something separate from the rest of the universe, which is,
Mm-hmm.
in Hinduism and stuff, it's just an illusion. In Buddhism, it's an illusion. In many modalities, and in idealism, it's an illusion, right? It's an illusion that we are separate, but we have to experience the world as separate, like you said, because you couldn't function if you didn't know where to put the spoon into your mouth to eat, right? Because everything is just a wash and you're just lost in the sauce with regards to what you really are and what really is. As you get into the ego disillusion, that sense of separation decreases and you get to experience more. Now, ego death is the complete and total absence of ego. And I think I've had one experience with 5-MeO, the Bufo
Oof.
Alvarius experience. That is ego death. That is where there's no separation with anything. There's absolutely nothing. And the experience is not, you're not seeing pretty colors or having images on the experiences of totality of everything, which looks like nothing. So,
How do you feel during that time? Is there any feeling as you know it? Is it? Can you articulate it?
no, that's why I think that that is like the final stage of, ego dissolution would be ego death, where there's no time, there's no space, there's no feeling, there's no anything. The only thing that's left is awareness, just like a unemotional, just a watching awareness, and nothing else. Time is gone, so you don't know if you're only under for like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
a year, tell me it's 2 years, who knows? Because there's nothing to grasp onto. There's literally nothing at all to grasp onto. And as you're coming back, um, I think coming back is the most profound part of that experience, because as you're coming back, different, time starts coming in, and then was I in a room? Like, where am I coming back into? These sorts of things start happening, and other messages and stuff start filtering through, similar to the kind of messaging and ideas and understanding and things that might come through um, with an ego dissolution experience. You start coming online, and all of a sudden the room pixelates, and we're like, feels like, I imagine at some point in time, when we come online as a baby, all of a sudden you're in a room and there's all this experience and there's a sense of separation again. Very
Instant.
intense. I don't recommend that one for 5% of people because it takes a lot to come back from that in terms of making that experience make sense in your life. It's a very challenging experience.
And you can't just go back to 9 to 5 job or big responsibilities. Is you're gonna get lost, or you're gonna lose a lot of the meaning and magic of the experience, a lot of the lessons.
Yeah, well,
You,
it's
you,
always important, no matter what experience you have, whether any expanded states experience, the integration part, and taking time to like think about that, to think about what you learned, what you brought back, because our memories are fleeting. So to the extent
mm,
that you can make sense of it and put it down on paper, and then whatever you decided you're going to do for your life, it's so important to actually then take steps to do that, make that part of your life. Maybe it's more volunteer work. Maybe it's to call your mom more. Maybe it's who knows what it is. Maybe it's to reconnect in a more deep manner with your children. Maybe it's to go out into the world and try and get some more meaningful connections of the sort that bring you real joy, that don't feel like they're just surface level connections. It could be anything, but that's very important. With the 5-MeO experience, it kind of shatters your sense of reality completely. It can. So that's a little bit much, and I don't know that I don't know that that is. It's certainly not useful for someone's first experience, or until they're like really into like trying to understand what's really going on in terms of metaphysics and ontology. Besides that, and their place in the world, and kind of like testing some hypothesis about some metaphysical ideas you might have, it's not super useful. That being said, that experience has been. I know several people who've said that struggle with suicide ideation, and they come back from that experience with the
cool.
understanding or the idea that suicide is not a way to get out, that there's
Mm.
kind of that is not for them any longer. Now, that's just a few anecdotes of people that I've spoken to who have had that experience and have come back away with that understanding. So I wouldn't like recommend it again because it's so challenge. It can be so challenging to come back from, and to go back to your regular life. That I don't know. It's a very uh, interesting one.
How did it change your life? How did it personally affect you that now you're living a better life?
Well, I do things much more slowly, much more intentionally. I'll listen more. I don't get wound up. I don't care so much about what other people think about me uh, on the day-to-day existence. With that one was funny because I kind of realized that no one was really paying that much attention to me to begin with. It
Yeah,
was all in my head.
exactly.
You knew that. I'm the player character, and all these NPCs care so much about me. It would really, really, no one's looking, no one cares, no one's that. The people that I engage with and interact with, care about, and are connected with, and are in community with, those people care, but not in a judgmental way. So that's a big deal. I ended up getting divorced uh, a while ago, and for the
Because of
last
the experience, you think? Because of the things you
because of a
understood?
wild experience, we grew apart. So I was on a certain path, ex-partner was on another path. It just wasn't working, and then I was dissatisfied. That was that. And since then, I've been in a relationship, and based on what I've learned about my contribution to things not being me, I'm going to take full ownership. Me changing in ways that I find to be more satisfying, and um, just a much more chill person. I'm in a great relationship. I've been for almost 6 years, um, and my partner is also in this transformational path, and been working on connecting with herself, as in deeper and deeper and deeper ways. And I don't think that there's a final test or anything. It's just about getting to know yourself and being more, satisfied, and feeling and finding out what you want to do in the world, and what gives you, a feeling of fulfillment.
Oh man, you made me think now. It's like all these things that I need to think of after this episode, but All right. So before, when you were talking about your experience, how you detach and this ego death, you reminded me of the teachings of some of the teachings of the talks of Alan Watts, which I
Mm.
know you talked about before. But to anyone in my audience who hasn't, the way he explains that we are the universe experiencing itself, and trying to find yourself, you will never be able to do that, because the same way that the fire cannot burn itself, the knife cannot cut itself, you cannot know yourself as consciousness.
Mhm.
And it is just something that I want to bring up, because to anyone who hasn't listened to this, go listen to the lectures of Alan Watts. They're just brilliant. And to me, out of any religious or spiritual ideas, that's the only one that kind of makes sense. And
Uh-huh.
I think that's it. Personally, I think that's it. We are simultaneously consciousness itself experiencing itself.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the entire. Um, Alan Watts was deeply impacted by Eastern philosophy. So this originally came from, you call it from the Indus Valley. So this idea that and these things were discovered through soma, which is that they don't know exactly what it was, but it was a psychedelic brew. And then these uh, these gurus, or not gurus, but these sages that would just sit on the mountain in deep meditation for years and years and years and years and years, to the point where they were having these expanded states and having these understandings and writing things down, and what they learned from this. And it is exactly that. They developed a corpus of information called the betas, and that has been luckily, um, you know, it still exists today. We still have access to that. And then Alan Watts was deeply, deeply, fundamentally enthralled by these ideas, and was able to articulate them in a way that is so easy to understand from our perspective, because he was an Anglican minister, and so he understands and he also has wonderful lectures of Christianity and its sort of deeper teachings, Gnostic teachings, and like that are very much in alignment with the same kind of understanding, but just a little bit harder to access because the symbology is a little more disparate. But Alan Watts is great, and that the way you described it is we are the universe seeing itself is exactly what I believe. And if you go back to that filter explanation, we are the universe experiencing itself. We have to see something different. If we were just the universe, then it would just be this one. Just imagine, there's a lecture Alan Watts saying, like this giant ball, and then these little bubbles popping up. With those little bubbles, and the only way you can, if you are experiencing the entire ball, you can't see anything, and that's the ego death experience. But if you're experiencing these different perspectives with little bubbles inside the major bubble, then you can see from all these different perspectives and have all these different experiences. And it's beautifully articulated, and I'm very much in alignment. I haven't heard anything from Alan Watts that I've ever been like, that is BS. It always is. It's timeless. His encapsulation, his understanding, his explanation is brilliant and timeless.
All right. So that being said, although we are consciousness itself, is this a cosmic grand accident of consciousness? Or do you think life on Earth has been conceived by our Creator or us itself for a reason? Or otherwise, is there a meaning of life?
That's beyond my pay grade.
Your opinion, what you feel like it is, you know?
I think I'm going to borrow from Bernardo Castro. It says the universe is
Mm-hmm.
what it is. It does what it does. Right.
Yeah.
Um, is there a grand plan? My suspicion is no. My suspicion is that um, metabolism is what allows for these bubbles, the separation, the sense of separation. And as the universe, it probably initially happened by accident. It's just one field of consciousness, and then through the process of evolution, it started happening. And the universe, as you look through the lower animals, they actually have some sort of goal driving things, even bacteria and things like that. But that's the universe experiencing itself from that level. And as it continues to grow, only now with humans and maybe some of the other primates do we have what we call metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, which is self-reflective capacity. So as we, this is from Bernardo Castro, right? So, who I mentioned before. As the universe continues to have more and more complex sort of separate alters, you call them, like separations from the broader consciousness. We've now evolved something called metacognition, which is well studied in psychological literature. But now we're able to think about our thought process, to be reflective. And as we die and go back into the pool, all that memory, all those memories, all those ideas, all that stuff doesn't leave, because they're, time is illusion, so it still stays there. And I think the universe will be becoming more self-reflective and may start directing things. But my intuition feels that things, the universe is what it is. It does what it does. But I don't know that it's, it's a cause and effect thing. But it is, the difference is what we think it's made out of. It's not necessarily that someone's got a grand plan in the way that you or I might have a grand plan of how we want our life to go, which never works out anyway the way we want it to.
Well,
the way we think we want it to.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in much of this. To anyone, because this is my first psychedelic episode as well on the podcast. To anyone who hasn't thought the meaning of life too deeply, I can only say what I think is definitely not being happy. So definitely not happiness, that's for sure. Because we are spiritual beings trapped in material bodies, and societal conditioning such as money is but a set of instructions to help our material self fit in civilization, while our spiritual self is craving for meaning beyond the boundaries of flesh and logic, thus trying to satisfy these longings of the material self with money, cars, and I don't know what else material things. It simply won't work. It's empty. It's ephemeral. It's not. You will never satisfy it. So yeah, I think the meaning of life is simply to be experienced. Part of it is money. Part of it is happiness. But the other part is sadness and uncertainty and everything of it. So yeah, to anyone perhaps that still thinks that, oh, I just want to be happy, maybe, I think it's something more than that.
Well, happiness is a transient emotion. So I would say satisfaction, peace.
Satisfaction. Oh, peace is
I would
the
say
ultimate
peace,
one
ease, and it's very, for me, it's very important. And Alan Watts actually talks about this very much, is that you cannot have a peak experience without having kind of an equally bad experience. And you think about loss and grief, right? To the extent that love is, if you love someone, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, to the extent that you love them knowing that you will inevitably lose them. You'll either die, you'll break up, something will happen. That has to happen. The more you love them, the deeper that loss, that grief will be. And the grief is an expression of love that was never able to be expressed. It's the grief.
I like that.
So with every bit of happiness comes, in order to really feel the joy, the love, connection with a partner, loving connection with a partner, there's going to be the other side of that, because the universe always works in balance. And it's you go into it. I mean, you can become quote unquote enlightened, and this is what I think enlightenment is, where you lose, and I don't know what the experience of it is, because I'm certainly not enlightened, but you lose the sensation of desire towards one, that I want the love, and you realize that it's all perfect the way it is, in a deep way, that you're not just saying that as a bullshit sort of spiritual, trite saying. Like, you really lose it, and recognize that everything is in flow in that thing. And I have actually chosen to, there was a while where I was like, oh, I'd like to be enlightened, meditated a lot, and did all this medicine, and then I said, think I want to be fully embraced into this human experience. I want to love my partner as much as possible, my kids as much as possible, knowing that with the capacity of my level, sadness at some point in time, deep grief, someone will be lost. Even people with their pets love their pets so much, sometimes more than their, more than any human that they've loved, and their pet lost, and they're absolutely devastated because they can't express that love. They don't have that outlet. So it's a very complicated thing, what you're saying. And I think it's, the acceptance of that understanding. Maybe that's a taste of enlightenment, of just recognizing that. And I don't know. It's, it makes me a little touchy because it is. You can think about the inevitable loss that we will all have with all things, and the way that
That's what,
we're attached to it, and
yeah,
the way that we're attached to it.
that's what brings meaning to all of it. The end. Without it, it would be pointless.
Well, that's
Before
true.
you, before you came to this realization that we are the universe experiencing itself, were you religious in a traditional way? Did you believe in God as whatever name your book had it?
Well, I was raised Catholic. I
Mm,
abandoned that and I became a real staunch atheist. I was I was into science in the way that a layperson understands science, right? Not in the way a real scientist would understand science. It's meaning that
mm-hmm,
um, I believe that there was, if we, I should say, I chose not to believe anything that hadn't already been sort of vetted and understood and been um, identified as quote unquote real by the, you know, what had been vetted through some sort of scientific rigor. Now I immediately realized, actually on my first ayahuasca experience, that was bullshit because, um, there was a part in time that there was this is just an example, an anecdote, but there was a time when we didn't believe in germs. We didn't know that germs existed, right? But germs existed. We just hadn't identified them. So recognizing that the more we learn through the scientific method of existence as it is and how the universe behaves, um, always inevitably leads to more questions. And at the frontiers of science today, including the, what they call the hard problem of consciousness that we alluded to before with regards to the paradox of your brain having less activity under psychedelics, meaning there's less brain metabolism, but more experience. That's a huge paradox because you would expect it to be the other way around, right? And also, the frontiers of physics, like how is it that two entangled particles can know in quotes what the other particle is doing light years away, and be able, that information is transferred, instantaneously. Instantaneously
mm-hmm,
meaning like way faster than the speed of light, meaning like literally instantaneously. How can that happen? Means that the way that we understood the universe, and we talk about it colloquially in terms of like these little separate little atoms that kind of, yes, it's not, it's fields, it's a field, and then probably eventually find out that it's one type of mathematically describable field, um, and that everything is just Bernardo calls it a useful fiction, to be able
exactly.
to predict, to make predictions of the world, so we can have phones and our technologies and our computers. It works well enough to allow for these technological innovations, but it doesn't necessarily. But we're relying on how the universe behaves, not what the universe is, because no one knows what the universe is. Uh, and I think saying that it is consciousness um, is a good way of putting that into a catch-all, because we are experiencing consciousness right now, both you and I, and every sentient being every living being on the planet is having some sort of, maybe in the universe, I should say, is having some sort of conscious experience. However, what that is in terms of describing it, defining it, becomes, beyond saying that it is experience, beyond saying that it's, can be divided into something called qualia, fundamental bits of experience. Beyond that, we don't really know. So,
Man, so many things to unpack there, but I'm gonna need you for a part two to explain far more, far more. All right, so I think I'm gonna end the episode here, so people who are gonna listen can process it. And then if you're happy with it, at some point we can do part two and focus just on ayahuasca itself. Because I think if I shift that now, it might just be too much.
Yeah,
Sounds good?
sounds great.
So then I'm going to ask you the last question then. What do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, what do I be on? I think I don't know that I want to be remembered beyond my children, my partner, and the people that I'm friends with. I don't need to be remembered or even thought of by the world. I'm not interested in being famous or anything like that. I want to be remembered for being a good person, for helping others, for being a man of my word. I want to be remembered for living a purposeful life and for helping others, I would say. And as my kid, I asked him once, I want to be remembered like my kid described me. He said, you never yell and you're very wise.
Man, that's a good one. That's an aspirational one for many people. You never shout, but you're always wise.
I'll take that.
That's nice. Michael, you've been awesome. This is a very beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And they're questions that people don't usually ask me. Thank you. I appreciate that.